Alex Merced of alexmercedcoder.com. And this is going to be the first video in a series of just kind of going over the basics of TypeScript. Okay, now if you're not familiar with what TypeScript is created by Microsoft. It's a superset of JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, you know the vast majority of TypeScript as a programming language. If you don't know JavaScript, you should probably learn JavaScript first. I do have a playlist on JavaScript where you can pretty much get the lowdown on JavaScript. What TypeScript does is that it takes the newest version of JavaScript. So yes, now I guess we can say, whatever the latest spec of JavaScript is, and then add several features that are not in JavaScript that a lot of developers would like to have in JavaScript. And you get TypeScript. So think of TypeScript as, you know, the latest spec of JavaScript plus. So we're not going to spend too much time learning the JavaScript part because that you can just learn by learning JavaScript. What I want to focus on is when setting up TypeScript, kind of talking about what makes it unique and why it's something definitely worth learning. The big benefit of TypeScript is that it allows you to do much larger, complex projects with fewer errors and better code, and just more deliberate semantic code than you would in just pure JavaScript, and you'll see why in a moment. Because JavaScript, there are a lot of aspects of JavaScript that aren't explicit, as far as like what do you intend a variable to hold? Do you intend to hold it a string, a number, whatnot? In JavaScript, that's very flexible. Okay, so you can assign a variable. So let me just go through a file over here. And actually, before we do that, let's install TypeScript. So you should have Node installed. If you don't have Node installed on your computer, go to nodejs.org and do that first. But I'm assuming probably if you're looking into TypeScript, you probably already have Node installed. So you need to run two commands to get Node installed globally on your computer. This will actually install TypeScript. So Node install the G is to make it global TypeScript, so that way you don't have to be installing it for every project. Okay, so boop, do that. And then there's another tool you're gonna want. We'll talk about that later, but install this as well, tsnode. It'll allow us, because generally what happens, the way TypeScript works is that you compile the code. So if you want to make sure that it's TypeScripty, meaning you're running through all the TypeScript checks, you have to compile the code. This tsnode will allow you to kind of run the code through the TypeScript way and catch those errors without having to compile every single time. Now, cool. So now that you have that installed, let's come over here. I have basically, once you have those two things installed, you can just create a TypeScript file. Instead of a JS for JavaScript, you just use TS for TypeScript. And let's play around with it. So basically, right now, if I just go like node, and this file is called practice TS. Okay, it's just going to treat it like a JavaScript file. So it's just going to run. Okay, and print 5. So basically, what do we see here? In JavaScript, I'm able to console log hello world. Wonderful. But then I created a variable, and I assigned it hello. So I assigned it a string. But then I immediately then go ahead and assign it not a string, a number. Which is cool. There's a lot of benefits to that flexibility as well, but there's a downside to that flexibility. JavaScript doesn't know that maybe you meant something else. Maybe you only meant for that to ever be a string. So maybe I really meant the string of 5. But JavaScript doesn't know, and it will never know. So the only way for me to catch those errors is by putting in console logs and really paying attention to what those console logs output to make sure that JavaScript is doing what I think it's doing. It's not going to send me back an error, because to JavaScript, that's not wrong. So TypeScript adds some flexibility to be sort of implicit about what I expect. So now if I were to try to compile this, so let's just compile and see what happens. Okay, and notice I didn't have to declare my variable. I didn't have to put like a const or a let. It just works. JavaScript will oftentimes sort of kind of assume what you're trying to do, which means your code ends up being a little less clear, a little less clean, because you get sloppy. You don't put semicolons everywhere. You don't constantly use let and const because you know it'll kind of just know that you meant a new variable, which then when some other coder comes and reads your code, they're going to be like, I think this is what you meant. JavaScript figured it out, but it just makes it hard, especially as the project gets bigger and bigger. So this is kind of where TypeScript is trying to be a solution. So let me compile this code. So once you install TypeScript, to compile it, you just use the command tsc. Okay, and then we're going to type in the name of the file, practice.ts. And then I hit that. See, so it's running the compiler. It'll notify me if there's any problems. Eventually it just ends up churning out, and then here we have some errors. Okay. Let me just... So this threw some errors for a couple of different reasons. Okay, one, let's take a look through the errors. So it said it found 3 errors. So 1, 2, 3. So that's where we run the command. And here are the errors. So the first one, it says, cannot find my name in my var. It ran just fine when we did it, with Node and just ran it as normal JavaScript. But the reason is, TypeScript wants you to make sure your code is perfect. So that means I need to declare my variable. Okay, so let me declare it as a const. Okay. And that's obviously going to error out because it's a const. So what I need to do here is do a let. Okay. Save. But what if I really wanted that? Well, first let's compile it that way and see what happens. One experiment at a time. So it's compiling, it's compiling, it's compiling. And let's see what it says. Okay, so this time it should be able to recognize my var because I declared it. So it'll now, going forward, know that I'm referring to this my var. But it still found one error. Why? Type 5 is not assignable to type string. Because when I assign the string to my var, it's telling it, oh, okay, this is a string variable. So I can't suddenly assign it something that's not a string. Cool. So in that case, now I'd be able to go back and say, do that, and I would have caught that. Okay, instead of looking at my code and being like, why is it behaving this way? And console logging 50 things to figure out where my code is going wrong and why things aren't adding or something's showing up as undefined. I can see right here I made a little mistake there, and it just helps me get my code cleaner earlier, so that way my errors don't end up being compounded later, which makes the code easier for bigger projects. Okay, so this time it compiled just right. So if we take a look at practice.js, here's the compiled code. Okay, so what it does, it compiles it down to ES5. Okay, so that's sort of like where pretty much all browsers will accept JavaScript. So see, it turned my let into a var because that's sort of the older way of doing it. Otherwise, it's all the same. Okay, and see, it made sure that I assigned a string and I assigned a string. Cool. Now, what I can do, what if I don't want it to compile down to ES5? And what if I want it to compile to ES6 or ES4 or whatever? So what version of JavaScript do I want? You can actually have a configuration file. So what you do is you would just type in tsc, I think it's init. And then that's going to create a configuration file in that folder where you can actually create settings to configure the compile process. So that way when it compiles down the code, it's going to compile it down to where you want it. Let's see what it says. Init.ts.found, not found. Okay, is that a flag? I forget exactly, so I think it's tsc init. Let's see here. Successfully, there we go. Yep, it's just a flag. So then here we have this tsconfig.json, kind of like your package.json for Node. And then here it has all sorts of different options you can choose. So you can sit there and specify which version here. So right now the target is ES5, but I can choose from any of these. Okay, ES3, ES5, ES 2015, whatever you want. And there's all these other options. Sorry. Okay, I can specify whether I if I'm using JSX, what kind of version of JSX I'm using, whether it's React or React Native's version, etc. There's all sorts of different cool stuff you can go through here and configure. I'm going to just leave it as is. It's fine for now. Cool. Now, what if I really wanted my variable to be a number? I can actually explicitly type it. This is sort of the really cool part. Okay, so I can say, hey, I want this variable to be a number. So when I do that, when I do the colon, basically what I'm saying is, hey, I'm going to create a new variable. This variable is supposed to be a number. Okay, so maybe I'm supposed to assign, so I'm going to change this back to 5. But then it's going to watch what happens when I compile it. Okay, now if I were to run this as Node, okay, Node, this file is going to error because JavaScript doesn't really recognize this syntax. So let's try that TS node thing. So TS node practice.ts, which should run it as TypeScript. Okay, so it's doing the thing. Okay, and we got some problems. Okay, type hello is not assignable to type number. So see, it realizes, hey, you wanted a number. And this is not a number. Okay, and then basically that creates a problem. Okay, so that's sort of the initial big selling point of TypeScript, that since you're going through this sort of compilation process, since you are adding these checks and having sort of the compiler make sure that you're typing your code sort of better in a better form, it makes one, it gives you discipline. It's going to make you a better programmer, because you're not going to get sloppy in the places that maybe a lot of developers get sloppy with the semicolons and the constant lets and whatnot. But also it's going to make your code more, when you're actually typing your variables, other coders will know, okay, this is what you intended, and it's going to make your code more readable, and it's going to make your JavaScript run less errors in the end of the day. So that's sort of the purpose of TypeScript. There's a lot of other features of TypeScript that it adds, but this is sort of the key thing, the reason why it has its name, TypeScript, because it has types. And there's all sorts of types, booleans, arrays, and whatnot. And you got to be explicit. Like if I wanted to create, now I could just not declare a type, and then it'll just assume whatever type of whatever I assign it first. Okay, or if I just wanted to be able to, let's say I want that to happen. I want to assign hello, and then I want to assign 5. I can actually make it type any. I'm pretty sure this will work. So it just means just you can let anything go. But again, then you end up back in the original situation where you might run into runtime errors that are kind of hard to diagnose. And see, that works. So when you declare it as a type any, then you bypass that whole typing issue. So you have that flexibility if you really want to, but you can be explicit about that. You can say, hey, I want variables to be flexible in these situations, but not in these situations, which is nice because you're going to limit the errors and the difficulty of finding those errors. So I'll see you guys in the next video. We'll talk more about TypeScript and cool features in TypeScript.